10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 399. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to episode 399 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. So happy you are here. If you're a new listener, welcome in. If you're a returning listener, let's keep going on this series we've got going on Have You Met Miss Jones? So we've talked about a lot of stuff, but most of it has been around key center playing. And for the last couple of episodes on this tune, I want to stick with that. I want to stick with that because I think it's really, really valuable to so many of us out there. I've gotten some great feedback from some listeners that have worked on this stuff, and I want to just keep going down this path. I don't want to kind of get into the chord-to-chord playing that we talk about so much in jazz education. I want to see how far we can take this sort of diatonic thing that we've got going. So we talked about the fact that you could basically play over the entire A sections in the key of concert F, with a few exceptions if we even want to use those exceptions. And then we also talked about the fact that the bridge just goes through three more keys, but we can still narrow that down to a whole bunch of diatonic stuff where we're just playing in major keys, right? And that's basically taking care of it. So hopefully you have gotten to a point where you are starting to have some stuff happen with this diatonic approach to this tune. I mean, we've been working on it for, I think this is the 6th week, right? So if you're really putting in the time and effort with some of those things that I've been talking about, the diatonic playing should really be happening, and you should be starting to come up with some phrases and some material that you're playing over this tune that, you should kind of be happy with. And if you're not yet, don't worry about it. Here's the key to becoming a great jazz musician. Don't stop until you get to that point, okay? Don't convince yourself that it's never going to happen, that you don't have what it takes, that this diatonic approach is not for you. What matters is coming back and doing it again and again and again and again until you find something that you like and that you start to evolve into somebody that can play something over this. It's not impossible. Most people just stop before they ever get to that point. All right, I'm starting to get off on a tangent, but I don't want to. All right, so today's topic is going to be how can we take, for instance, an F major scale, and how can we actually go beyond playing diatonically, but not following every single chord change, right? How can we add some more color to this diatonic style of playing? One of the things that we talked about in episode 395 was I challenged you to think about some of the different shapes within the major scale. So like I challenged you to, okay, well, if we play an F major scale, but we play it in triad or 7th chord shapes, stuff like that, where's the appropriate time to use those different shapes, right? Because it's still diatonic, but what we're doing is we're playing in such a way that we're actually outlining different chords and different shapes that are contained inside of that diatonic model, that diatonic constraint of playing in that key signature. So what I want to do this week is I want to challenge you with some guidance on how we can take this diatonic thing to the next level, okay? So just because we're sort of quote unquote being constrained by a key signature doesn't mean that there's a ton of stuff that we can't do, right? So let's start with something that has to do with notes, okay? So if we keep the diatonic scale, like an F major scale, as our vessel, right? We want to be doing things that directly relate to that structure of, in this case, a major scale. That does not mean that we can't go outside of that key signature as long as it has some relation to that key signature, that it still has the key signature and the diatonic scale at its core. So I could use notes outside of the key signature, but I need to think about how I'm going to use those notes that make it relevant to, at the end of the day, the key center, which is exactly what we're talking about here. So, what if I were to do a couple of things here with the concert F major scale as my prompt? I'm starting with that F major scale, but then I'm trying to come up with some things that sort of dance around that scale. All right. So, what if I did something like this? Would you agree that that all relates to this? We have not lost the thread of F major, but if you figure out what I just played, you will realize that there's a ton of notes that are outside of the key signature of F major. What if I did something else? Again, it's definitely related to that sound, isn't it? So it's serving this key center way of playing, but I am thinking critically about how I can add things to quote unquote make it more fancy, to make it more hip, to make it more angular. But notice that I didn't really have to think about the chords to do that. And if I start incorporating some of these things into my abilities on my instrument, then I can all of a sudden add a whole new dimension without ever going out of that key center playing. Now, here's the rub, it takes the experimentation of doing it over and over and over again to start to figure out where certain things work and where certain things don't work. It's not like just plug and play. But unfortunately, nothing in jazz is really just like plug and play or anything that's really worth learning. So you're gonna have to do some of this. So there's an example of notes that I'm adding to a diatonic structure that can completely change what I'm playing without changing the fact that I'm only thinking in a key center. Okay, so that's notes, but there's another aspect to this, which is rhythm, right? So if we want to add notes, we could also add rhythm that will make it really interesting. And I could actually just change up the rhythm without doing anything with notes and come up with a completely different thing. So what if I did this with my concert F major scale? What if I did this? That completely, again, completely changes the complexion of how I'm using a major scale. Now let's go back to that first exercise. And I think this is a really good example of where the rhythmic thing and the note thing intersect. And if we start to get good at thinking about both of these things, then all of a sudden we're like unstoppable. Because you'll notice that sounded a little bit awkward, didn't it? Like that. I don't like that. It just sounds awkward. So now if I say, okay, well, I really like that rhythm and I'm starting to understand how to add some notes that serve that major key, that key center, then I start to go, okay. Oh, okay. Well, now I've got something super hip that I could actually play in my solo. And it all came from these two ways of thinking. Let's think about a rhythmic scheme to make it more interesting. And let's think about how we can add notes that still serve our vessel, which is the key center that we're in. So here's your homework for this week. I want you to come up with one thing you can do in terms of notes where you are adding some notes, perhaps some non diatonic notes, but the notes that you add, they have to serve the key that you're in. So here's a really good way to experiment with this is sit down at the piano and play an F6 or an F major 7 chord with your left hand, and then try to write your exercise. Whatever it might be. That was terrible, right? But then I would go back and I would refine it into something that I actually may want to use, okay? And if what you're playing doesn't have some relation to that chord that you're playing with your left hand, you may want to rethink it so that it serves that key center that you're in, okay? But this is really the way to unlock everything at the end of the day. And I'm not like being hyperbolic. This is actually how to unlock everything. So I want you to come up with one exercise that involves notes and how to make just the plain old major scale more interesting. And then I want you to come up with another one that has to do with rhythm. All right. And what you might discover through doing the rhythmic thing is that you may want to add some non diatonic notes to make your rhythmic thing work, and that's totally fine. And vice versa. You may want to incorporate some rhythm to make your note thing sound cooler. And this is going to be tough, especially if you've never done it before. Okay. But it's through this kind of work that we really get to the good stuff, the really good stuff, and a self sustaining jazz education. So I really want you to think about this week, and I really want you to do those two things. The Patreon members are going to get a demonstration of the two things that I just played so they can pore over it and try to figure out what I'm doing. But really the point is to do it yourself. I'll also throw in some new backing tracks this week so that you just get another crack at soloing over the top of this tune. Because at the end of the day, that's going to be another thing that's just going to be huge for you is to just stick with this tune, get more reps on this chord progression than anybody else, and you'll sound better than anybody else. All right. Now, you heard me say the Patreon members, if you're new to the show, this is a listener supported podcast. And the way that the podcast keeps going is in the form of small monthly donations from listeners just like you. But you do get all these supporting materials with every single episode. So you're not just supporting the podcast, you're actually supporting your own jazz education by getting a lot more than what I just present on these episodes. So if you want to become a supporter and you want all those extra things, you can go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, or you can go to patreon.com and search for the 10 Minute Jazz Lesson podcast. You'll get all the info over there, and As soon as you sign up, you will get instant access to every single episode that we've ever done, actually. So there's an incredible backlog of materials over there. Quick shout out to some new patrons this week. Thank you to Zach, Rob, Ray, CVM, and Jerome. Thank you all for joining up to support the podcast and get those jazz education materials. I hope you're enjoying that. And to everybody over there that has been supporting us for months and years, thank you. We could not do this show without you. All right, everybody. We'll see you next week. We're getting close to the end of this series. I hope that it's benefiting you. I know I've had a blast presenting it to you. And we'll cover a couple more things, and then we'll move on to the next. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.